Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are and whenever you're listening to this or watching this. My name is Yuri Castro, and I'm very happy to be here today with you to co host or to help my co host, Marcia Trajano, talk about consciousness and spiritism, mind, spirit, and the evolution of consciousness. And if you like one of these talks, the Solitude Center for Spiritual Living releases one of these every first and third Sundays of the month. Marcia, welcome.
Hi everyone.
If you could please have the floor and let us know a little bit more about the evolution of consciousness, how spirit, how the mind, how it all connects. I'm very curious to hear about that, but I'll leave it up to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Yuri, and I'll talk to you in a few minutes. Bye. All right. So we are here today to really explore what to me it's a quite fascinating topic, consciousness. And I would like to say that the purpose of today is within the next few minutes to, for all of us, you and me, you in the background, right, to reflect upon how does Spiritism as a body of work, a literature, a religion, a philosophy can help us understand this topic, consciousness. And let's go ahead and I just have a few slides for us to just have some photo to think about it. But I want to say to answer the question, right? We first need to look at the very idea of consciousness itself. Shall we explore it together? Well, interesting enough, when we start researching, reading, etc., we often find it considered a mysterious, and I'm going to say air quotes here, awareness, right? And this awareness, it's what makes us who we are. I believe we can go maybe through this reflection through many lenses, including the spiritist lens, but we would be perhaps having a gap if we did not also have some thoughts and interactions from a modern scientific and philosophical view of the problem, right? In Spiritism, we know that self awareness or consciousness is the main attribute of the spirit. But from a philosophical perspective, perhaps we start to see that the same self awareness is defined as the understanding and reflection of one's own personality, one's own traits, feelings, behaviors. And there is very interesting to know there's some philosophical viewpoints, such as those related to Hegel, right, that emphasize self awareness as the crucial aspect of the spirit or the Geist. And it's often linked to the development of consciousness and understand of your own place in the world. So when we start to think about it and wrap it all together, we can conclude that self awareness and the associated self knowledge are really elements that are essential to our personal growth, our personal transformation, and they allow us to recognize our strengths, our weaknesses. They help us to set our goals, make some decisions that are aligned with our values. But we talk about right consciousness is spiritual. So let's just to put a little bit of content on the larger points of spiritism. And if we think about the works by Allan Kardec, there we find that the concept of self-awareness or consciousness again is fundamental in understanding the spirit, and it's also central to the spiritist literature. Within the Spirit's book, we find discussions that implicitly and explicitly highlight self awareness and consciousness as those inherent qualities of the Spirit. So let's think about some key concepts that can help us understand why is this so important to us as we embark in a spiritist presentation, right? So some key concepts include the idea of immortality of the spirit, as we understand that we are immortal spirits temporarily inhabiting, and I'm touching my shoulder here, right, as I can see in my arms, but inhabiting this physical body. It implies that there is a continuation of consciousness beyond this physical vessel, this physical form. So, Spiritism emphasizes the existence of both a spiritual world and a material world, and of course, the interactions between the two worlds. So, you and me, the spirit, as intelligent principle, embodies consciousness and self-awareness, and they go from both worlds. That interaction, it permeates with that sense of awareness and self-consciousness, right? Self-awareness, etc. So our spirits evolve. How, Marcia? Well, the same principle. We evolve through successful incarnation, and as we go from one incarnation to the next, we gradually gain knowledge and gradually also attain our moral perfection, or we attain a little bit more until we get to that sense of moral perfection. We are imperfect spirits, but we are perfectible. Therefore, this evolution is gradual, but it's always moving toward that goal of moral perfection, which implies, interesting enough, a continuous development of our own awareness and understanding. So think about it. Those concepts not only you find them in the Spirit's book, but for example, in the Medium's book, we also start to learn that the mechanism of communication with the spiritual world, for example, implicitly acknowledge the ability to communicate, to reason, to learn, to be aware, to broaden our consciousness. So, if we think about it, the ability to be self aware is really peppered, right? The body of work from a spiritist perspective is peppered with that notions of this ability to be self-aware, as we can see a fundamental aspect perhaps of understanding and engaging from as a spirit, right? From that vantage point to the larger context of existing. So, in so many words, so that I can be a little bit clearer, consciousness is what defines me as a spirit inhabiting right now this physical body, because it is through consciousness that my spirit, becomes aware of its own existence, and beyond that, its actions and the consequences of those consequences. So, in the consequence of those actions, sorry. So, what I'm talking about is this linkage, almost like a chain, that one implies the other, that implies the other, and implies the other. So, if we were to kind of uh, get into a conclusion, is that my spirit, your spirit, the spirit, it cannot be defined solely by the notion of intelligence, but also by our ability to reflect on ourselves and our choices, which is critical, vital even for our own evolution, right? But is it okay? Okay, you talk a little bit about spiritism and how consciousness um, is contained, or the references to consciousness in the spiritist literature. But we maybe want to spend a bit of time thinking about the question, what is consciousness, right? And we could ask, and it's, I put that in the in the um, slide here, because we could ask, is consciousness just the firing of neurons, right? Is it our thoughts, our feelings, our memories, or beyond being just the firing of the neurons, or that emotional landscape of thoughts, feelings, and memories, that deeper layer, which we could say it's the very essence of the spirit that is immortal, therefore survives each incarnation. So we know that for Spiritism, consciousness is absolutely more than a brain process. It is really the result of those countless reincarnation. I joke with a friend just a few days ago that you may be on your 15,000 in one, right, incarnation. And it was just a joke because we don't know how many reincarnations we go through, but we understand that my own consciousness results from the experiences and learnings and self-awareness that I attain through the process of reincarnation, through the process of our own growth, spiritual, psychological, moral growth, and of course, my sense of spiritual awakening as we go through those lessons. And because I wanted to maybe go even further here, we can go over about several points, I would say about 5 points that we can bring when we discuss spiritism, right? So, point number one is, if we think about it, consciousness is the means by which the spirit will perceive what's right and what's wrong, and distinguishes between perhaps those actions that I have partaken on and how they are aligned with the divine laws and those that are not, right? So we can understand that consciousness is perhaps the reflection of those divine laws within us, deeply inside of us. It's we could call it this moral compass, right? And the moral compass will guide us toward good and bad, irregardless of the cultural context, where you inserted your education level, what is your, and I call subculture, as I'm referencing your family dynamics, all of that. It's completely independent because it's inside of you. I may be a child and already be very aware of how I align with those divine laws, or maybe in my last days of a very long life, it does not matter, right? And we have to think, as my spirit evolves, my consciousness becomes more and more attuned to, say, goodness, to leading a wiser, perhaps, or better choice that I go through in my life. So the divine laws, we can understand, are indeed imprinted on the consciousness of every human being, meaning it is the consciousness, right? Immortal and remains with then the spirit across many incarnations. So, as we become aware of our actions through self awareness, we begin to understand the criticality of the responsibility in its choice. I was just reading not so long ago a little tiny book called by Joanna de Angelis called Moments of Health and Consciousness, and the chapters are a single page. It's very easy to read, but that one chapter that as I'm talking to you now, it comes to my mind is the sense that indeed uh, what we and Joanna in the chapter talks about consciousness, but guilt, right? As we become aware of our actions and the impact and my responsibility, I know what's right and wrong. There's that pregnant pause, right? And those are my words. But Joanna, and I have her book writing for to be quite large book. Um, she spends a lot of time talking about productive and unproductive guilt. We're not going to stop to talk about guilt, but it's very important that we could go as we become aware of our actions that, oh, Marcia, why have we done this? And feel guilty. It's mostly unproductive if you don't do anything about it. But anyways, um, another point that Spiritism teaches us around the subject is the fact that consciousness is also linked with the idea of free will, right? So, what is free will? It's our freedom and ability to make our own choices. And of course, every action with the law of action and reaction, right? With every action, there is a reaction. Therefore, while I have the freedom to choose, I also have the responsibility to bear the accountability for the consequences of my actions. So, consciousness is this again. I mentioned the moral compass. We can also call it an inner guide that points toward what is morally right, as well as warns us against what it is wrong. This inner guide becomes clearer and clearer the more we progress. And you start to see that the notion of expansion of consciousness, because the more we become aware, the better and easier it is to make decisions that are more aligned to the divine laws. So, we talked about the immortality of the spirits, but another point in understanding those concepts as it relates to consciousness is the fact that one of the as a body that goes, it dies, the physical body, but the spirit survives and the spirit reincarnates. The main purpose of reincarnation is exactly to develop consciousness, because if you think about it, each life offers opportunity for learning, right, to refine our sense of what's right or wrong, and to address our past mistakes. So in every opportunity for a new corporeal existence, a new incarnation, we expand that awareness, and the more we expand our awareness, the more we can see when we are making mistakes, and we start to also see our successes, of course. So the more we become sharper in seeing what we're doing, and also in before we even do it, we have an understanding of the impacts of what we're doing. Our self-awareness, our self-knowledge deepens as well. And of course, because we are reincarnating spirits or souls, we carry forward all the experiences from our past lives. So, with those experiences, also we bring our unconscious memories, right? And those unconscious memory become accessible as our consciousness evolves. So it's very interesting to think about it. The idea, the notion of self improvement naturally, organically allow us to broaden our self awareness and understand and align to the laws that govern life. So, final point is to maybe think in terms of spiritual progress, right? And we talk about this continuous improvement, this notion that spiritual uh, progress is part of our journey of evolution, and the resulting progress is directly impacting that conscious expansion. The more our spirit becomes aware, for example, of its own feelings, its own awareness of its what I call the emotional landscape, the more it becomes closer to that ideal of one day become, perfect spirits. And the other thing that I wanted to just say from that perspective is while consciousness does not warn us of mistakes, well, sorry, while consciousness does warn us of our mistakes, it does more than that, which is a motivation toward altruism, generosity, a sense of integrity, and again, all of those attributes of um, uh, those spirits that are purer than what we are today. So, just concluding my thoughts here, consciousness is a key instrument for our growth and evolution. And I bring here this sense of the great enigma, as I call it, because when we when we put science and spiritism together, we start to see that it's still an enigma. So, science specifically is still seeking to understand this so called phenomenon of consciousness, its origin, for example. And the other side is from a spiritist perspective, if we can ask, right, if the divine laws are written into our consciousness, how would that align or even differ from the scientific understanding of this enigma, right? So I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking a little bit about some scientific um, ideas and um, interesting studies. So, as we said, the definition of consciousness is the ability to perceive oneself, one's thoughts, one's emotions, and surroundings, as well as it allows us to have subjective experience in a sense of self. Yet, the mystery of it all, the exact mechanism behind it remains this enigma. What is it? How does it start? So, interesting enough, neuroscientific studies of the brain's electrical and chemical activity to study consciousness still, no matter how many people are studying, they still cannot fully explain how do those brain processes generate subjective experience. Some theories do suggest that the consciousness arises from complex neural network. Fascinating. I I just read a book about it. It's excellent when you start to put two and two together. Is this type of neural network, or does how does it apply, for example, to artificial intelligence? How does it apply to emotional intelligence? It is awesome, and but it's quite complex. It's still not fully put together, and um, Rose, I would like to just bring an example of Roger Penrose and David Chalmers, who are considered to be the two most prominent thinkers in our modern debate on consciousness. They approach it from very different, their different background, and they propose very different approach. Basically, um, Penrose argues consciousness requires new physics or non computable quantum processes to be understood. So Chalmers just say that it is a fundamental property consciousness of reality, but he calls it this hard problem, and he tries to understand why and how physical processes can give rise to subjective experience, right? So while they're very different, they agree that mainstream computational neuroscience isn't enough. They are absolutely flabbergasted because no matter how advanced we are in that field of scientific knowledge, that it's yet still not enough to solve consciousness, the idea of consciousness. And they have different, solutions to the problem, because Penrose looks for answers now in quantum gravity as well as mathematics. So start to think about it. It's an approach that is interesting. And Chalmers, on the other hand, he said, no, no, I'm not going to go to mathematics. I'm not going to go to quantum gravity, but I'm going to look for answers in metaphysical frameworks and philosophical analysis. So, as you can see, it is truly a conundrum on how to get to definitive answers from a scientific process on what is consciousness, where does it come from, how does it work. But we're talking here about now about spiritism, and for spiritism, consciousness goes beyond all those material explanation, because spiritism calls it an intrinsic quality of us, of our immortal spirit, and exists before and after this physical life. And there is a complete correlation or reflection of divine law. And as such, consciousness is defined from a spiritual perspective as the means, the tool, the platform to perceive the sense of responsibility and that moral compass. And they both closely tied to our free will. So that's why I wanted to give a little pointers on the key concepts or the key tenets of Spiritism. And as such, Spiritism was very flatly stating that it is not just a brain function, it is a spiritual faculty. Therefore, science, while limited to material analysis, is unable as of yet to explain consciousness because it ignores that spiritual dimension, right? And spiritism simply proposes that to have a true understanding of what consciousness is will come when humanity recognizes the immortality of our spirit, our true nature, right? So let's just keep moving on. And I'd like to bring a little bit more from Allan Kardec, as well as some thoughts from Joanna de Angelis and Andre Luis. Of course, if you're not familiar with Joanna de Angelis, Joanna de Angelis is a spiritual author that her beautiful body of work came to us through the mediumship of Divaldo Franco, and Andre Luis, equally another spiritual author that came to us through the mediumship of Francisco Candido Xavier. So Allan Kardec, he says, right, that the mind is the tool, right? But the spirit is the true self, the immortal essence. And he keeps on to say that our thoughts, our emotions, and our choices, even, they leave impressions in our spirit, and they shape who we are over multiple lifetimes or corporeal existence. And he described, as I mentioned a couple of times already, that the more consciousness is the moral compass of the soul. He calls this the inner voice that guides us toward what I would say the good, right? The good outcome of our lives. For Kardec, interesting, life is a school and consciousness is both the student and the notebook, recording everything we do, everything we think, everything we feel, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. So it's very interesting. So if we think about, if consciousness is indeed a vehicle for our moral evolution, we should understand it not only as a mechanism for perceiving oneself and the environment, but also as that inner instrument or tool that allows the spirit to identify and be able to apply all the laws in its own life, right? So I have a couple points of reflection for us in terms of what Spiritism teaches us about, specifically about consciousness. Well, number one, the consciousness is a reflection of the divine law, right? And why do I keep saying the same thing? Well, because we have to understand now that those divine laws are not the laws written in books or even, sacred books or external precept, but it's truly engraved in the conscious of all of us. That means that the conscious of each one of us is the channel that allows us to perceive spiritual norms, to guide us through our choices, regardless of my social upbringing, my cultural context, my gender, my age, my country of birth, country of where I live, so on and so forth. Because interesting enough, it, unlike a sacred text that dictates what and what not to do, because it's not written there, but it's written inside of us, it does not impose any sense of external morality, but help us recognize and live what I consider to be, and I'm going to say good or evil, what I consider to be that harms or does not harm me, or that benefits me or does not benefit me in a very intrinsic and personal way. Right. Another point is that you could say that it is also an instrument of self-control and improvement, right? So when we talk about the process of the evolution, consciousness will act as this, this alarm. And I see in my mind's eye, when you drive in your car and there's a little, yellow light comes, oh, you need to do this, or there's maybe a mechanical failure, or it's time for you to change your oil, whatever. But it's that internal instrument that tells you, of course, it's your choice, your free will to go and stop or make an appointment with your mechanic or not. And the sense of self-control really helps us identify what to do, how to act, how urgent to do this. And so important enough to repeat that it's not just a sense of judgment, but it's a guidance toward our impulses, our desires. And because of it, this internal inner guide for self control improvement can enable me and you to reflect on my choice and decide, is this what I want to do now? Really? Or no, 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 no. I I will control myself in that regards. So from that perspective, we have a third point, which is that sense of being the guardian of justice, right? How does it do? Well, consciousness records and stores everything we do, all of our actions, and those actions are continuously being evaluated in the context of the law of cause and effect, or action or reaction, or like many Eastern philosophies call it, the laws of karma, right? What I do, I'm responsible, and will have to respond to the impacts, the results from those actions. So good actions bring um, peace, satisfaction. Well, negative actions will create, remember, Joanna, I mentioned, Joanna cautions us, don't fall to that discussion on the guilt. It's really a separate discussion. It's not a separate, but we don't have time to go over this. But let's not say that I did something wrong. For example, um, I lied, and my conscience, my inner guide say, Marcia, you did something wrong. You lied, right? And I can fall into, I will not lie. I identified that I lied. My inner guide did that to me. And I asked for forgiveness to whomever, to myself, to the person that I lied. And I promise I will never lie again. And 2 days later, boom, I am lying again, and I can try to do better, or I can fall into the idea of I'm guilty, I'm a horrible person, I'm a liar, and so on and so forth. But anyways, it's interesting to think that the moral discomfort, right, is not uh, an external punishment, but it's just a consequence that that sense of justice, it's there to correct us for future better decisions. So divine justice, interesting enough, through this topic that we're talking here today about consciousness, is inherent to the spirit self, and it's always present to guide us and to correct our own imperfections so that we can move to become a less imperfect being, right? So it's really an adjustment, fine tuning of our journey. um, Another point is this sense of again, consciousness being the vehicle for us overcoming just being um, taken by our instincts, right? What am I talking about? Well, as our spirits develop, it does learn to overcome the more primal, more animal like, instinctive, selfish impulses, right? So we become able to understand what's right or wrong versus just being reactive to external stimuli out there. And initially, if you think about it, consciousness is perhaps a direct reflection of our biological and needs, our basic survival instinct. But as we evolve, it becomes now that instrument, that tool, that gauge, that yellow light in my car of our moral discernment, and help us distinguish what is that I need, truly need, for me to evolve versus what I want, what feels good, etc., etc. And it's really interesting here. I mentioned a little bit about free will and the law of cause and effect, right? So it is that mechanism that is connected to the sense of divine justice, to free will, to the responsibility or accountability for your action, all wrapped up in the sense of consciousness. Because as we expand our consciousness, we internalize the importance of our choices, and because of that, we become wiser, right? And as a result of becoming wiser in our choices, we live better lives. And what I mean by that, lives that are not so fraught with conflicts. Therefore, we are able to attain inner peace and inner harmony. And when we fail, because we will fail, we are red light in the dashboard of the car, and we are alerted, we made mistakes, but then we are taken, driven by, at the earliest opportunity possible, to correct and learn for those mistakes. So finally, we touched base upon that already, but it's important for us to perhaps think about that consciousness in the sense of immortal human beings that we are, immortal spirits, sorry, that we are. It plays that crucial role in our reincarnation process, because we, the spirits, recognize our past mistakes, and in planning for future incarnation, the future of roadmap of our evolution, we reflect and really take a moment to look about what we've done, how much do we want to address that. So the goal here in this journey on earth is, as spirits, immortal spirits that we are, is to always become better, and that consciousness is our guide, right? It's our GPS telling us go right, go left, or keep straight for our choices. And it's really, to me, fascinating when we think about it. But let's go ahead and start to wrap up. I would like to bring a couple of other authors before we conclude, which is Joanna de Angelis, I mentioned. Joanna de Angelis talks a lot about consciousness as an evolutionary process, right? And for her, consciousness is not static, but a process for continuous improvement that begins with the psyche, and it unfolds through each incarnation. And she, Joanna, love Joanna, she states that that is that faculty that progressively improves. That's a talent, that skill set that becomes sharper and sharper as we evolve. So as such, inherent into this statement is that it's not fully formed at once, right? develops, the process of conscious expansion is it's gradual development, and it is a direct reflection of my moral and spiritual evolution, and it is really rudimentary at first, but improves over time. So there is a Joanna has this loving n- notion about just welcoming us in all of our flaws, right? And just tell us, listen, look at yourself, and have courage to go through your self-awareness, self-improvement, and you'll be okay. In some of her books, just as a plug, The Awakening of the Spirit and the Integral Human Being, she explains that consciousness is that, again, the inner instrument, but that will help us, will guide us, and will help us to really become better in what we do. And the other thing that she says that I haven't talked before is the fact that she discusses the uh, evolutionary process of consciousness. You find the individual and the collective unconscious. Yes, Gustav Jung talks about those. So the individual, real briefly, the individual unconscious, mine and yours, will store individually our impressions, the record or documentation of my own spiritual history, my accumulated experience, my choices, my imperfections, my qualities, all of those acquired through many existence. When they are unlocked, this individual unconscious allows us access to self knowledge and really facilitates the awakening of a higher consciousness. The collective unconscious, the other one, in her view, relates, of course, to the experience of the entire humanity and directly influences the individual attitudes and behaviors. So the collective unconscious represents the collective memories of all humanity, and it will shape society and culture and reflects where we are from an evolutionary stage perspective as a species, right? What is our collective spirit evolutionary stage? And she, again, she highlights that all of us evolve, and that this awakening process is essential for our progress and enables our spirit to overcome past errors and actively work on improving our qualities. Now, if I flip to Andre Luis, he too speaks a lot about consciousness and that idea of documenting, of recording our actions, that imprint. And the two books that will be good for you if you haven't read Andre Luis in his beautiful collection, right? His works of our, nosso lar, our home, or evolution into worlds. He describes consciousness in a very pragmatic and scientific perspective, associating again with that imprinting of our actions and experience. And so, from that perspective, he says that consciousness is not only self perception, but also this tracking mechanism for all of our choices. So, our choices, our actions, they will leave mark on our spirit, and they will influence our behavior, thoughts, and feelings in future existence. And so they marry quite well, Andrea Louise and Joanna de Angelis. So the joint contribution from those two is how they emphasize consciousness as an important instrument for our growth, but also how they document, they track our memories, right? And they offer, whenever read from those authors, they offer a broader understanding of consciousness as this essential faculty for our moral and spiritual development, and highlight how fundamental it is for our own growth and evolution. I am almost at the end, so let's just talk a little bit about how science meets spiritism, right? And if you think about human consciousness has been evolving for millennia. If you look into that evolution, it goes from pure instinctive survival to reason to moral and spiritual awareness, right? So, from that perspective, each challenge we face, personal and collective, they push us forward. And I say this, and I reflect upon the fact that Spiritism doesn't stand in isolation. There's this quite beautiful dialogue with science and philosophy. So I mentioned some scientists, and I just wanted to bring a couple more here because just points for reflection. Because while neuroscience investigates pure brain activity and how those brain activities will relate to our thoughts and emotions, psychology now studies behavior, trauma, self awareness, and philosophy will ask the big questions, the big why, right? Why do we exist? Why? What is reality? So, when we put all of those together with Spiritist teachings, we start to get this richer, more complete picture to maybe embrace both what we can measure, observe, and measure, and what is immeasurable, right? And we can see that as contrasting they are, right? In how they approach from different perspective, so that we start to get a broader view of the definition, the proposed definition of what consciousness is, and how indeed it is a manifestation of the immortal spirit, right? I love to think that science, particularly in the fields of neuroscience, right, they are really seeking to understand consciousness, but they focus on the biological and physical aspects, right? What do they do? Well, and it's fascinating to me, but they do that by measuring neuronal, I guess is the word, neuronal activity in the brain and how they generate perceptions. They can generate a number of things. And this approach analyzes the brain mechanism involved in conscious experience, right? And they do this by mapping the origin or attempting to map the origin of consciousness in terms of brain structure and processes. There are many neurophysiologists out there, William Kevin and Antonio Damasio, for example. They offer interesting, fascinating takes on the problem of scientific study of consciousness, right? And I just have to say that Kevin emphasizes the mystery, the enigma. How can something so personal and subjective arise from a very physical system, right? And Damasio emphasizes more of the function, right? He talks about this evolved functional capacity that keeps us alive and aware. And they both agree in one point that this topic, consciousness, it is so complex and that we're far from a complete explanation, whether we approach it from the standpoint, say, of pure biology or from what we could call the puzzle of the subjective experience. Paul Davies and Carl Jung, and Paul Davies is a theoretical physicist, and Carl Jung is that famous psychotherapist and psychoanalyst. They they do observe the limitations of the current scientific community view when it treats to the mind as a byproduct of brain activity without considering the possibility that they may be independent of the physical body, right? And when we meet spiritism with all those thought processes, we see that now not a product of matter, but a manifestation of the spirits. I love that the spirits book states for us that consciousness is the faculty that transcends the brain, and it is linked to intelligence in the spirit itself. And the spirit immortal, um, according to Spiritism and all this beautiful literature, it contains this divine spark that enables the human being to develop its own awareness, its own moral discernment, and the perception of that moral compass, right? What's good, what's bad. So within the context, I we just have to conclude that it is consciousness and divine laws and divine justice are all a super entangled type of concept, and we are therefore looking for this inner guide that leads us into our own journey, and that journey is beyond our material life, our biology, our physical, the physical aspect of our body, right? So, from that perspective, I just want to say that in closing, right, that the neuroscience studies the brain role of thought and emotion. Quantum physics challenges our ideas of time, space, and reality, and Spiritism is here to complement everything by saying consciousness is primary. It shapes reality, not the other way around. So we should think that consciousness is really the bridge between the mind and the spirit. It is the bridge between science and spirituality, and by understanding it, we also open the door to self knowledge, moral growth, and a deeper connection with life. Whew, I think we finished the discussion of consciousness. And let me see, what does Yuri say about all of this? Hey, Yuri.
Hello, Marcia. Thank you so
Hi.
much. This was very thorough, and I love the fact that you were able to bring science, philosophy, religion, spirituality, psychology. I think you made a few bridges there, and which is great. Always enriches our understanding of such a complicated topic with
Yeah,
relates to consciousness. So that was
yeah.
excellent. I
No, thank
appreciate
you.
appreciate that talk. Would you mind saying a final message or saying a prayer for us to finish our work here today?
I would love that. To Yuri and everyone out there, just want to say, if we just, perhaps, if you're comfortable and can, close your eyes and be aware not only of our inner guide, but all the spiritual guides that are close to us, blessing all of us, hoping that we, as imperfect but perfectible spirits in this beautiful journey, can become more and more aware of all that we bring, all the previous journeys that accumulate in so many different memories, so many different learnings. We ask, dear Lord, our Father, our Creator, to, in this moment, to bless all of us. So be it. Thank you, Yuri.
So it is. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody who watched us, and I'll see you next time.
Absolutely. See you soon.